Carter is coming back in a minute. I'll be asking her to quickly review the agenda for today. And Carter, if you're ready, please.
Today, you will be reviewing the professional police policy, police contact policy that includes some changes that you proposed from the last meeting. Have an opportunity to ask the chief questions about the report that's in the packet and receive a report from Juan Carlos about the Biospace Policing Committee and the work that they are doing.
Thank you, Carter. Next, I'll just turn over the floor over to Jim for public comments.
Well, we have 2 people signed up. Is there anybody else that's... Looks like I haven't missed anything. So, got Deb Frisch. You want to...
Do you mind putting them over here so they can see the camera?
Oh, sure. That's for sure. We'll have
Carter,
you...
I'm going to bring all the candy over because Carter said it was food. Since there's only 2 speakers, I'm going to take 2. Okay, so...
And I think you know the rules, so I know you've been here playing. We've got 3 minutes if I remember right.
First, I would be remiss if I didn't comment on the lack of gender diversity tonight. I have nothing to say about it other than to note it. I'd like to talk about the stop data that's been collected. As you know, there's sort of a 2-stage process. One is determining what data will be collected when the racial profiling data collection process starts, and then the next part is the policy, which you're going to review tonight. And my understanding is that the only stop data that will be collected and analyzed for racial bias is stops that lead to either citation or arrest, and if a stop only leads to a warning or nothing, then it won't be included in the analysis. And this is an incredibly bad idea, because you can only analyze for biases if you have all the data. So if you want to look at things like are racial minorities more likely to be arrested if stopped, then you need all the data before you can analyze it. And I got a reference to Dr. Renauer who at PSU from Carter, and he was super, super nice and helpful on the phone, and I wouldn't want to quote him, but he seemed to believe this also, so I would strongly encourage you to contact him about this if indeed I'm right that only a subset is going to be collected. And just in terms of this data collection, I just wanted to note that the Eugene Police Department doesn't have a great track record in terms of data collection. As you know, the downtown public safety zone data was not able to be analyzed because of a lack of appropriate data collection. The property and evidence fiasco could be viewed as a data collection problem. So my second comment is about a public relations train wreck that is in process. There are 2 parallel processes going on. There's the sort of stop data process that you're going to review the policy tonight. There's going to be a pilot program implemented in July, and that's there's a little bit of grumbling among the activist community about the fact that there was sort of a secret. The word stealth has been used, stealth committee used to advise the chief on this, and it wasn't a public process. So there's a little bit of grumpiness out there. And there's a subcommittee now to set up a public forum and a public hearing about bias in general, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the race-based policy that's being started now. So if you go forward with this public forum and public hearing, it's going to add to the perception that you're trying to deceive and mislead the public, because these 2 activities have absolutely nothing to do with the ongoing process to start this stop data thing. So if you have this hearings, it's going to really look like it's deception, and even though I think it's just sort of a lack of coordination between the police commission and the police department, it looks like deception, and there's already a feeling of that because of the, quote, stealth committee. So I would urge you to maybe hold a public hearing on the policy you're talking about tonight, and maybe put off this sort of more generic conversation about bias-based policing. Thank you, Carter, for...
And next we have Jessica C. Screen. Jessica.
I just want to make some comments on the professional police contacts draft policy you're working on.
I'm sorry, Majesky, could you speak up just a little? I'm getting old and a little deaf. Thank you.
Just a few comments on the professional police contacts policy that you're working on. In the definitions section, the issue of economic status, I believe, is kind of unclear when you really look at these definitions. The second paragraph, bias-based policing, refers to a list of things, and it says such as, and then economic status is in that list. It's a list of protected class characteristics, such as. And then the next paragraph is protected class based on the Eugene Code, and it has source of income, but Eugene's code does not include anything about socioeconomic status. And so the result of that, unless you guys do something to clarify this, is that there could be some sense that it is included, but actually it's not. And I don't know what you all could do to clarify that. I would actually like to ask the chief to be very public in clarifying whether or not it's included. And also, I think I want to ask, maybe the whole police commission would like to ask too, would like to ask our city councilors and Human Rights Commission liaison too, to really consider undertaking a process to have discussion in this community about, do we want to add that to the list of protected classes in the city of Eugene? And I don't know if the chief is hoping that that even if city council does not take that step, that it's still one of the types of bias-based policing that you don't want to have happen, and so you want this policy to help prevent it from happening. I think you're in a tough position to try to figure out how to handle that when city council has not made it a protected class yet. But as you know, there's a lot of interest in the community in getting on top of the concern about bias-based policing based on socioeconomic status. Then under supervisor responsibility, there's no mention here of suggesting to the person who believes that there was some targeting or bias going on, no mention of suggesting to them that perhaps they'd like to go to the police auditor's office and make a complaint. And I think that it would be good to add that. Thank you.
Anyone in the audience would like to speak? You would? You don't mind facilitating one? If you don't mind coming over this way, and we'll have your name for the record stated. Do you mind, Jim?
Okay. I'm Melissa Wellington. It's nice to see you all today.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you have the name, Carter? I didn't. You know,
Yeah,
okay.
she knows about it. When we were meeting about the anti-bias profiling with just the police commission, Mr. Valley brought up that it's been a long time in coming. And Eugene has a history of racial bias. As he said, we were the people who I think had the KKK the longest in the country, undercover, but we had it. And it's taken a long time to do this. It's going to involve change, and probably your people are going to hate it. I know I've hated at work when new policies came down, and I wouldn't let that stop you, because when you really have a change that needs to be made, sometimes you have to overkill. And maybe it'll be easy, but I don't think so. But I'd encourage you to keep along the path that you're on with this. And I really appreciate that you guys are trying to do this, so I applaud your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess that concludes our public comment session, and I'll turn the time back over to Juan Carlos.
Thank you, Jim. So, Cara, did we try and capture that last lady's statement and info, or do you have that?
I got it.
You got it, okay. Thank you, those who came. So the next item on the agenda, we're going to go around and hear from the commissioner's response. This is your opportunity to either respond to what you've heard tonight or anything that is in your mind. Hopefully it's pertaining to the police commission. So I'm going to start with this side and then go up this way. So, Mr. Whalen?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to all the speakers tonight. I appreciate your comments. That's all I have today.
Thank you, Edward.
Yes, also thank you for your comments. I appreciate it's a schlep out here for some of you. As we just recently heard Tuesday, folks would be happier if some of these meetings were held closer to the transit hub, and I can appreciate that from the point of view of folks who are disabled or have mobility problems. So, I'm not sure where both of our chairs are tonight. This is kind of a new experience for me, so just watching how this evolves when that's the case.
And thank you for your public comment. I think it's important to get comments from the public and the community and people who feel strongly about something. I also have a little report because I'm the liaison between the Citizens Review Board. We had 2 cases there, and one of them was the one that took international media of the slapping or of the brushing off of the 10-year-old child, and we all agreed very much with the chief that the police officer was acting within his rights and did it gentle, and it was not out of any anger at all. The guy was, as a matter of fact, incredibly calm throughout the whole situation. So that was a big sigh of relief for me. We would have loved to have had it go viral, our decision and why our decision was, but I don't think that's going to happen. We also had another case of a search which was not warranted, and I must commend the chief for the letter he wrote with a little hand note on the bottom of it. I thought that was professional and also personal. So that's what the police committee or the Citizens Review Board talked about. Thank you.
Mike, good to see you.
You too, my friend. Good evening, commissioners. I wanted to say that I appreciated the public comment tonight very much. Appreciate that. Agreed that accurate, complete data collection is important if you're going to make any intelligent conclusions from it. I agree with that.
Thank you. Jim, thank you.
Also, I would like to, seems like a common theme, thank the speakers for coming, and I do agree with exactly what Mike said. It is important to be accurate and to pull in all of the data, and I think it will create some difficulties and some slowdowns for the police. I don't see a lot of way around it, but I think the data collection is going to be important, and to get the right data is going to be important too. And I hope the chief will have the opportunity to speak to some of the comments made tonight too. And I guess I'll leave it at that. Nice to see everybody again.
Thank you. Jesse?
I wanted to clarify, Majeska,
Are these for all of us, or do you?
the source of income, are you saying that is not part of the definition in the Eugene Code? Everything else is, but
No,
not
I'm saying
that?
source of income doesn't really get at the issue of like amount of income.
Right.
Or amount of resources that one has in the community as far as their economic status.
Okay, this is the wording from the code,
Yes.
but whether it covers what it should cover.
Right.
Gotcha, okay, thank you. And I apologize, I'm gonna have to leave early tonight after the work session. I have to get up to St. Helens and I have to drive there after the meeting. And I forgot to bring, but I'm going to forward to everybody, an article that was forwarded to me by a local resident about communities actually turning away the military vehicles that the federal government's been passing out to local communities. The I don't even remember what they're called, but it's about some communities not wanting the militarization of their local police. I wish I had that with me, but I'll be sending that out this next week. That's all.
Thank you, Jesse. And James?
Good evening, fellow commissioners, Chief Carter. Everyone, thank you for coming in, providing comments and stuff. It's very important. A couple of things that came out of the that I picked up on is one is that the committee that's being established, I think we had talked about this in previous meetings ago, is that the makeup of the commission that the chief has picked, we were going to, once that has been taken care of, that information shared with the police commission. The police commission would then make a decision to do a outreach committee, and the outreach committee will take the results up and get some more additional information from the public itself. So I think we had talked about that. That's one vehicle where it is transparent. The information is just something that's my understanding is going to be to answer some of the questions that the chief has directly. But we, as a police commission, will take over the other part as far as the citizen outreach or the public outreach. That's the way I understood that. So if I'm incorrect, then perhaps we need to talk about that a little bit later. The statistical analysis, that is a good point, though. If you're going to have a valid research study, then you want to look at a very broad area to include a lot of other variables and stuff, because if not, then the results may seem a little biased because you're only targeting one area and you can fix that area to come out to the result that you want it to be. So in the efforts of being open and transparent, then perhaps there are other variables and stuff that may want to be considered in there as well. I've been doing enough of those, so I don't want to go any more. I'd like to take this moment here to congratulate Commissioner Lord for a fantastic win. He's well on his way to be the, attorney of the 50s and 60s.
Clarence Darrow.
Okay, well, congratulations on your first jury trial win stuff, and I hope that you did do a plug-in for the police commission, let us know that, that you're for the public. And in my other hat that I wear for the state, we were partnering with the Department of Justice to provide some additional funding, request for additional funding, so that some of these areas that there are lack of law enforcement, they don't have the capability to go in and serve warrants and things like that to increase their funding. So I've signed a letter on behalf of the State Advocacy Commission that I chair, and that's moving forward. I hear it's going to be met with very positive results. So that should also filter over where Eugene and other municipalities and stuff will get some additional assistance out of that as well. So public safety is always paramount to anything that we talk about, anything we do, and we got to make sure that we're transparent as well. I hope that the public is thinking that we are. Thank you.
Thank you, James. As we welcome in our chair, I will continue with the round and come back and turn over things to him. Bob, I'll leave you last. Joe, want to go next?
Yeah, I wanted to thank the speakers who came for comments tonight. I thought they were very essentially right on what we need to do. Other than that, I don't have any comments.
Okay. So I wanted to make a couple of comments on three things that were in my mind. The first one is about the child. I also had the opportunity to watch the video. I didn't have the privilege to see all the investigation, all the reports that came with it. That usually is where all the details are, and where you really are privy to all that, really what's going on behind. As a father of a 10-year-old, I will be distraught if my 10-year-old is being taken away from her mother, and in doing so, trying to go back to her mother, and in fact ends up biting an officer. And the officer, in my mind, with all the respect to his profession, I think could have demonstrated more restraint. And though I respect the reaction and I respect the findings, but I would not want to have any police officer slap my child in that area at all. So I just want to make it part of the record. If the chief has found that the use of force was within policy, I respect that, but respectfully, I will hope that the police department doesn't think it's okay to slap kids that are in our community. In regards to data, I am also looking forward to see what's going to come out of that data. This is not the first time the data has been collected. In my report, I will share with you a couple of things that I was able to find. Data collection may in fact show there is maybe biased or there's something that we need to do. It may be also showing things that we need to work on. Data collecting is not perfect, but it is something that we're moving in the right direction. So I appreciate the department that is going and moving in that direction. In the end, not only the police commission, but also the committee itself, we are acting in good faith. We're going to be making decisions based on the information that we research or the information that is presented to us. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind. This has been a long time waiting for many communities for this specific policy to be out there. But again, I remind you that, at least in my mind, in good faith, decisions and recommendations, I think are going to be okay. The last one, I am too also troubled with the possible precedent. I did mention before, and with all the respect to the chief, he has chosen to have his own committee, which is his purview. But I also think that if the police commission is going to recommend a policy, but also including something that we have no control of, as I previously mentioned, that is something that I encourage the police commission not to go that route. I believe that this body and our connections can present enough resources for the chief to in fact help him in that area. Although I also was thinking whether or not maybe the chief doesn't see that on this side, in which case that will be something that he might want to comment on. But in the end, if we're going to be approving a policy in which a very significant portion of the policy has no control and in fact leaving it blank, I will not be behind that policy. It'll be like stamping a blank check in my mind. Thank you for the extended time. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn things back over to you.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, for handling the duties of chairman while I was. Apologize to the commission. My wife had a medical procedure that I had to get her to and get her home safe and sound, which she is. So I'm sorry I missed the public comment, but I assure you folks that I will read the minutes and hear what you had to say so that we can digest that. Thank you for coming tonight. Again, everybody for the diligence. I guess we've had a round so far. Okay, so this is great. We're probably ready to move into the next phase of our agenda. I would like to take.
Mr. Chairman, I believe there was one of the commissioners wanted to see if the chief wanted to take an opportunity to respond, or.
Okay, I missed that.
I don't know if this is the right place for this, or if it's later on during the chief's remarks. I don't know. That was.
No, if the commissioner has a comment or a question, certainly the chief has a response, a time to respond to it, absolutely.
I know the chief has time later in the meeting, so I wasn't putting him, I just was hoping that he'd be able to respond tonight at some point. It wasn't necessarily right now.
Okay. I just wanted to honor.
Yeah, I just want to, if you.
This is what it's like at our dinner table. They talk about me like I'm not even there. I have to remind them, I can hear everything.
I'm right here.
No.
I was just going to suggest that if you don't mind, it might help the people who come to the meeting, people who speak, for me to have a couple minutes, just like the rest of the commissioners at the beginning of the meeting, because they're often gone by the time we get to the end of the meeting, and I don't have
That's perfectly fine, yeah.
I'm not on the agenda to present any longer, which is the other time that I've used to respond. So if it's okay with you, I'll spend 30 seconds to say a couple things. The suggestions that you brought are good ones. There's a lot of data that we could collect. This is a big project, and we're in the middle of a massive records management shift for our department. And often when an organization can afford to start conservatively with something new, then they learn from that after a year or so, and then have a new public process and add the other things that we feel we should add. But if we add too much right now, it might just collapse in its own weight, which is why we're probably just going to start, at least this would be my suggestion, start with what the Department of Justice and other communities who've gone to this kind of data collection are using, which is a smaller list, and then grow it as time goes by, as our department figures out how to effectively analyze it, how to do the input, and maybe even grow the circumstances under which we would input that data. So I think, a lot of places learn that if they start small, perfect that small list, those small set of circumstances, learn all the lessons they can from that, and then in the next phase, move on to something bigger if it's affordable to do so, then they should. Which is why I asked that we get an interim policy in place by this spring, start the process in July, run it for a year, learn as much as we can, and then finalize something new after that. I guess it's more than 30 seconds.
Oh, no. So we're moving on to professional police contacts and our continued policy discussion. Matt here?
Yes.
Matt, would you like to join us at the table for this part of the agenda?
I'll block the camera, though.
That's all right.
Slide over here.
It'll get your best.
That's right. So I'll just call your attention before we go any further. I'll call your attention to a couple of edits that were suggested to me through the Human Rights Commission. If you go to the first paragraph, 4021, the very last sentence, it's not reflected in your packets, that's why I'm going over it.
Okay.
It should be amended to read, this policy will apply to all sworn members, the authority to detain, investigate, and arrest persons, or provide law enforcement service. I did that because we're not always investigating or arresting somebody, we might just be, there's other services we provide. So we've added that. And if you go down to, in the policy section, 402 sub 2, the second paragraph, the first sentence is long, but then the third line, after, will provide equitable law enforcement services to the community with due regard for the racial, cultural, we had or other differences before, we've struck that, and it'll say or protected class of those served. And then that's all for edits on there that aren't reflected in y'all's packet.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the first one that is reflected, and that's 402.4.1. Looks like the third paragraph has been struck and replaced by all contacts that involve detention must be reported. Now, we wanted to get a little discussion on this. Is anybody, any commissioner that has anything they'd like to say about this? Edward?
I'll just say, I've only been on the commission a short time. There's probably a fairly finite number of people in Eugene who know who the heck I am that I have anything to do with this. But this is the complaint that I've heard, of the few that I've heard, consistently is so-and-so says their kid was stopped or I was stopped. I didn't like the way it went, and when I went to fill in the blank, the police department, the police auditor, I was told there was no record of this. So that's very frustrating to me as a commissioner, because I don't know what to tell them after that. And it's frustrating to me as a citizen, because it sort of seems like something ought to have had a box ticked somewhere that said I at least talked to somebody. I can understand that there are contexts in which officers are not going to want to ask people for their identification. There's no grounds for it. So what do you document? People are going to be unhappy that you asked for their ID so that you can document the fact that you spoke to them about what? So I see both sides of this. I see that there's the possibility of creating an onerous system, as the chief said, that would be unwieldy, that officers would look at as in the way of their just getting on with helping people and on to the next call. I don't know what the answer is, but I do say that this is something people bring up to me, is I don't know why I was stopped, and I don't seem to have, there's no being a record of it. So this is obviously something that's on people's minds if me, a newbie, is hearing this often. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Jesse next, and Kip, and then myself.
On the memorandum that you sent out,
Yes, sir.
Matt, you talked about the three kinds of police contacts: encounters, stops, and arrests. And then the policy calls it a detention. Why not go with stops? That way you would include, like last month, I think there was discussion that if you're going to stop a vehicle, for instance, drivers are required to stop if you light them up. There's a constitutional stop there. Why not document that? And that would keep from the absolute broad interpretation of having to be an encounter where you just go up and talk to a group of people and
Yeah.
feel them out.
Yeah. Understood. And I wanted this change reflected just the language that was voted on by the commission. So I didn't want to input, that was kind of the purpose of the memorandum, was to identify that we, a detention to a police officer and a detention to a citizen might mean two different things. But you're right to point out that a stop is statutorily defined. An officer can wrap their head around it. Somebody who may not in the moment know could go back and look. Okay, there's an ORS, 131-605 or something like that that governs or tells you what a stop is. So I didn't want to deviate from the language that y'all moved to have in the policy, but I completely agree that there should be something that is probably less ambiguous of a term that's there, that helps people understand the policy and when they will be, their information will be collected, because Mr. Gehring's right to point out that, and that's kind of where I was trying to let the memorandum lead people to, was that there could be situations where, you're right, I don't need to be talking to you any longer, or we're detaining your liberties to move on, but instead of becoming invasive and begin to ask you to identify yourself to me and all that sort of stuff, we just have to strike the balance between when do we really do that, because it's not worth the time of the person who's now waiting here. They may take offense to me asking for their name, date of birth, things like that. But there are some times where we need to have that. And I'd say it's usually higher on the spectrum of detaining your liberties, closer to a stop. But that's for y'all to discuss and decide. I didn't want to put words in your mouth.
Thanks.
Okay,
Yeah.
Jim?
Well, I was on the same page, exactly what you were talking about, exactly what Jesse brought up. I've even written down two possible amendments to this to make it more clear. I'm just not sure which one sounds better. The first one, so I'm not sure which one I'd like to throw out there. I would like to amend this to say that all contacts that become a stop or arrest must be reported.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Tim, a second by Juan Carlos.
Yes.
Could you repeat it for Carter, please, Jim?
All contacts that become a stop or arrest must be reported. Since we know what a stop and arrest has been defined as, and that seemed to be also where we were headed in our last meeting too.
Unanimous.
At the end.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor, so I'm going to continue with the queue and continue discussion only on the motion now. Let's refine what's on. So we have Mike and then Ed. Did you want to raise your hand up?
Yeah.
Okay. Mike and then Ed. Edward. So I'm next in the queue here. So my question was, and apparently this motion doesn't address that, but when we talked about detention at our last month's meeting, I'm not quite sure everybody had understanding of what a detention was as opposed to an arrest or just an ordinary conversation, and what the law says about that. So Matt, could you maybe expand on that a little bit, on what a detention legally means?
Well, I'm not aware of any word or phrase that defines detention in the ORS, and that's where we would go to find what does this really mean. I mean, I have an understanding of what it is, but mine may differ from Mr. Whalen's or Mr. Clark's. So in the memo, I tried to give examples of things that us and the courts, us being police officers and the courts, are terms that we hear almost daily. So a detention, if you asked me, would be pretty much synonymous with a stop. I'm detaining your liberty to keep going. Our contact is now, it will end at my discretion versus an encounter where it ends at your discretion. If you don't want to continue speaking to me, you're free to move on, and you could do so. So I don't want to infer or inject what I think a definition meant from the commission, but if you were asking me, a detention would be a seizure of your liberty, however brief, but it would look closest to a stop.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if I answered the question.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I have James, Juan Carlos, Joe, Mike, and Edward in the queue. And then Jesse, you go on second.
I'm not in the queue for the discussion, Mr. Chairman, but I am in the queue for the next one.
Okay. And Bill, you want to be in there? So James?
Yeah, no, I'm not in the queue for the discussion on the motion.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll strike it on that. Then we're going to Juan Carlos is till the next time, and Joe?
I still have some uncertainty as to when we move into the concept of the stop. From personal experience, back in the mid-'70s, when I was a student in the Boston area, there was a policy from the police, and it went on for about 6 months, where they were basically stopping anyone they didn't like for an ID check. And that happened to me a few times and to a number of people that I knew. I mean, we weren't doing anything, there was no crime to be investigated, they just were stopping people and demanding IDs. So, yeah, I have a little bit of a bad feeling about that kind of stuff. And then a story that came up for me during the discussion last time, and I didn't say it. I was down in Costa Mesa, California, and my car had a vacuum line broke, and the car was just not running. So I parked it, left a note on it, and came back. As I was working on the car, an officer arrived. And he basically, I was working on the car. It would have taken me about 20 minutes to replace the hose. And he decided he was going to keep me there. He said that he had responded to an alarm in the building of a possible break-in. It's interesting that there were people going in and out of the building all the time. But he basically kept me there for 4 hours, sitting on the curb. And then he finally said, "You're free to go." And I had a nasty sunburn from that. 20 minutes later, I had replaced the hose and left. Now, I'd say that's a pretty serious detention. Now, for me, the issue is, am I allowed, at that time, was I allowed to go? I mean, I had a car sitting there. I had to deal with it. But at the same time, when you say in here an encounter, that they can leave or stop the contact at their convenience, most people don't know that they can do that. And that's a serious problem, because you're having what, an officer's having what they think is an encounter, and the person is being detained, because their perception is, okay, it's an officer, I got to stay here for as long as they want me to stay here. So the question comes down to, how does the person know that they have a right to say, "Excuse me, it's okay to leave"? Now, in my case, that officer being there for 4 hours, we had quite a conversation for 4 hours. And he talked about how that when he was talking to me originally and I was working on the car, that I had a box cutter that I was cutting, vacuum hose with, and that if it had been one of his friends, the guy would have me on the ground with his knee on my neck. Okay, so, and I responded, if that had occurred, he and I would be talking about that in front of a judge. But, you can imagine what a 4-hour conversation with someone keeping you there looks like. So, that's probably an extreme case, but the reality is most people who stop don't know that they have a right to say, "Excuse me, can I leave?" And so how can we get that kind of information into a policy like this so that people don't have those kinds of experiences?
Well, I don't know that we could ever get language like that into the policy, because the policy is for officers. We want to govern their behavior. We don't want to, we certainly want people to understand their rights. That's important to us. It's not necessarily the policy's job. Oregon is a state, and the circuit the Ninth Circuit that governs our state and our appeals, has spoken to this issue, not directly. There's not a single ruling that says officers don't have to tell people they've encountered that they're free to go. They've certainly indicated that they like it when officers do that, but the courts scrutinize very heavily the contact between a person encountered and the police officer. And they look, I think, from the reference of, here's an officer who knows the law, and here's a citizen who may not be as versed in it. And they're very conscientious of an officer's actions. Simple requests, questions, a line of questioning, or the demeanor of an officer. The courts, I have a handful of cases I was just reading about earlier, where the courts will say that's transformed this encounter, this is no longer an encounter, into a stop. Although the officer and his peer at the district attorney's office, they thought they were on a solid legal footing, or else they wouldn't have brought the case forward. So I don't know that there's any way to get that sort of language into the policy. I know there are, it's second and third order effects of having to have a case prosecuted or adjudicated before a court says, that wasn't just an encounter, that transformed into a stop. But I don't know how we could write in language that says that you have to tell the person that they're free to go, because it's not a binding ruling for a court, and I don't know that we would want to codify that necessarily in a policy. However, I do understand there might be some kind of public education piece there, certainly for people who find themselves in that situation.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have Mike next.
Thank you, sir. I tend to want to be in favor of voting for the proposed language change. I would ask, based on the chief's previous comment about start small with gathering data, if he or the sergeant could help me understand the consequences of changing the language to the proposed motion.
I think it's probably a good idea. Stop is a really clearly defined thing. All of our officers understand it. They're trained on, we get a lot of training on what happens, or what constitutes a stop when we start in an encounter. So everybody gets what that means. And I think it's just a clear-cut, bright line area that we can work with. That would be a place to begin.
Is that about right?
I'll never disagree with the chief.
Well, sorry to put you in that spot. That was a bad question for me. All right. Sorry. I'm slow on the uptake sometimes. All right, that's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm a little confused. Got two cues going here. So, Edward, were you wanting to be on the motion or on the cue after the motion?
I think this is to the motion.
Okay.
I have some information to share about what is detention, and it's based on having been a facility manager for years. That's also managing off-duty cops and deputies and rent-a-cops in things like theft and loss control. And let me tell you, the legal departments of the different people I work for, whether that's the City of Seattle or some private organization, were very clear on this. If a citizen gets in the way of another citizen going somewhere, that can be an unlawful detention. Just standing in their way. So the shoplifting people were told to be very, very sure that they actually could draw a line from, theft to trying to leave without paying for it before they laid a hand on anybody or even got in front of them. Now, this may be an overreaction on the part of those attorneys and their insurance companies, but that's one place the public is aware of detention. Because I have heard a fair number of people shout at my employees, "You're unlawfully detaining me." When the guy asked, is that something of ours you're walking out with under your jacket? Ask the question. So there's that perception of what detention is. Then there's a stop, which has got a legal definition, and that's very plain. And so we've got this sort of spectrum of opinion on this in the public. And I agree there's a need for a lot of education over when you're free to go, when you're not free to go, when it's appropriate to ask that question, when asking that question isn't going to make anything any better. So there's an educational component to this, whatever policy we come up with. I do think that the simpler we make it for the officers, so it isn't a judgment call along that spectrum, the less they have to think about in the moment. And I think that's better for everybody. So the clearer it is, they know what they're doing. I also realize that a car stop is in a whole different realm than a person stop. A car, the driver of a car, is in a kind of an implied contract with law enforcement. I have agreed to have a number on the outside of my vehicle which you can use to identify me, find out information about the vehicle, wants, warrants, am I a dangerous person, all of that. That's part of the deal when you drive down the public street. But a pedestrian doesn't have that. An officer could document a stop of a car that was simply a conversation by just typing in Oregon and the license number into their modem terminal. That's documented. And that conversation is then time-stamped and so on and so forth, even if the details are right there. But how do you do that with a person walking down the street? You've actually got to interact with them to get the information. So I don't think this is helping our motion at all, but these are the things I'm thinking about it. I'm done.
Okay, well, I have Bill, Jesse, and James.
And I just had a couple of questions to Sergeant. I want to thank you for that memo. That was really helpful after our last month's meeting about trying to figure out what we were trying to do. But when a stop, what information would normally an officer collect at a stop?
Well, I think that's the catch-22. I'm trying to find it would just depend. I hate to sound so ambiguous. If I, like the example that the chief gave of
Right, and that's why I'm asking this question, because that's what kind of brings that, why I'm asking that, is that, so not always is there where you're collecting personal information on somebody that you've stopped, right?
Yeah. I can stop a person with the intention of just giving them a verbal warning. I don't need to go any further into identifying them, or just maybe educating them to a city ordinance that they're maybe inadvertently violating. Our goal is always to get the voluntary compliance of our citizens. So I wouldn't say that there is a rote set of information that you're going to collect at every stop. But I can tell you what I would collect if I were to go the entire duration of a contact with you and collect all the information that I needed for a stop. I can give you that example, but there is a spectrum.
So with this motion, then, would that require officers to ask for personal information at every time it's stopped by definition? So then we're actually even taking a more offensive piece and saying, not only did I make you upset that I stopped you when you didn't feel like you should be stopped, but now I want your date of birth, I want your name and address and all that. So,
yeah.
Okay.
But the advantage is, I mean, we're leveraged at that point to do that. We can,
right.
We can, because we've stopped you for a traffic offense, the pedestrian violation. We're now in the position where we can require you to provide that when there is a stop.
Okay. And I ask these questions because, to me, some of these things that we're doing is almost a slippery slope. If we start to say that we now have to get information every time an officer makes a stop that we normally wouldn't do, now we're collecting a bunch of data that we normally wouldn't have. And so that's why I want to make sure that when we say that we want this, is there another way to document that wouldn't require all that would still, and I think those are things we need to think about here. And what brought this to just to kind of give you a little bit why I was thinking this way, was a little bit what Claire said about, the NSA and all of their listening and whatever's going on there. But it almost made me think that, did that start like this, where we started saying, well, we want to know what people are, if they're saying terrorist on their phone, but now we want to know all their conversations. And slowly, as you build up listening to one little thing, it takes that we're now asking for a bunch of information that you don't want as a police department, and we don't want, that people don't want to give the police department. So that's one of the things that I just wanted to have us all think about as we're talking about when we're going to say this is.
Okay, Jesse and James and George.
I think Bill's comments are really important, and it's the integration of all this data into being able to identify people and put it together with what they do that it scares me at the same time. I see a lot of good that can come from collecting the information. I wanted to bring up a couple of things that just on the subject of what's a stop. It's probably the most litigated issue in criminal law is what's a stop. Just two things that stand out, recent cases. The state of the law in Oregon for about 3 years was that if the officer requested your ID, took it for a few moments to write information down, that would be a stop. That's not the case anymore. The Oregon Supreme Court just came out last week or last month and clarified that. Short, taking somebody's ID is not per se a stop. So that's not going to be included in this motion. Case from a couple of years ago, officer drives by a guy on the empty streets of Klamath Falls sometime around midnight, does a U-turn, stops next to the guy, points at him and goes like this. That was not a stop either. It's a tough call what's going to be a stop, but it's not going to include some things that do seem very invasive. And so I think it's important to keep this a work in progress, and I like that it's going to be revisited and be a temporary policy. And you can hear input for a year and come back to it.
Okay, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm listening to a lot of the conversation that's going around the table, and there is some valid discussion that's out here. What I would suggest is that there is an opportunity, because it seems that many of us on the police commission is not aware or have not had the opportunity to enjoy or participate in some of the police training, so that you have firsthand knowledge of what the police go through and how they are responding. So if there's an opportunity where some of the training, as we did with Captain Campcar when he did the bias training, to let you know the type of training that the officers are going through in these particular areas, in particular stop bias-related crimes and all these other things. So if you don't participate and get what the actual officer is getting, then you have that view from the outside that is probably not accurate. It's based on fears and tears and things like that. So if you have the opportunity to attend some of these training sessions, if we can set something up like that, then that would allow the police commission members individually to go through the process where they can actually see what the officers go through. And that will empower you more, so when you go out and you talk to people, you said, okay, here's the training, I saw that firsthand, what they go through. Okay, so that would help out with some of this thing. Another thing is like the collection of data. We are becoming a nation of fear mongers. I mean, we're scared of everything. You're going to get too much information on this, and I'm afraid of this. Well, look at your bank. Your bank has your whole entire history. Everything you put on Facebook, you put everything out there online. LinkedIn, you got everything that you're putting out there. Equifax, if you want to do some damage to someone, then those are the types of medias that you need to look at. It's not, you have your phone book out there, all of these things out there. What is the issue about public safety that I'm so confused about? I would rather know who the bad guy is. I would rather know if we have policies, in fact, and that we have training that these officers are receiving that we can actually participate in, give an opportunity, so that we know firsthand. You know, we sit back and we debate over one word for years and years, and we forget about it. This is a work in progress. We can always go back to revisit. I understand there are I've had some personal encounters with law enforcement in the past that were not very pleasant as a child. But that happened then. What are we doing to move forward? That's the question. What are we doing to move forward? Can we take this and say, okay, let's take this and put this puppy on the road and run it, and then we can come back and revisit it. If it's not working, then let's look at it again and see how we can redefine it and make it better. But to sit back and continue on, I mean, to beat up on it, God, I mean, I think we got better things to do than to keep on one word, stop.
Okay, George, and then Juan Carlos. So the first
And
round, George.
I'm kind of
this is really, really a tough situation. And, the old thing of, here's the good and here's the bad, let's put them together and see which one has the most. The good is, possibly we can see there's some stops that are, racially motivated, which is, I think, the intent of the good of it. The bad of it is the invasiveness of it. Here's another government bureaucracy collecting stuff on me. And do we need to get their name, their birth date, their whatever, and then to have them ask, what nationality are you? And to me, that would add, there's a balance somewhere, and I'm really, really confused about the balance. But to, as I said, to collect all the information, I mean, the good is great, the bad, I think, overwhelms the good here, and that's the way you need to look at every situation is, there's a balance in everything. And I think and also, and I've just got to say, the amount of costs of doing this, I always look at costs, and the way I look at costs is you have X amount of money for the police department to operate on, and if you start doing this, you're going to take a certain amount away from X, and therefore not distribute it in possibly other stronger priorities, such as violent crimes happening, people speeding, people drunks. I mean, so in my estimation, Carlos, I know there's a lot of good here, but I look at the balance of the logistics, the cost, and I don't think I'm paranoid, but I don't like always giving my name out. Thank you.
You're on TV, we know who you are.
Hearing on the radio, too.
I have Juan Carlos in this round, and if there's no one else that hadn't spoken yet, then we'll start the second round with Joe.
So I appreciate Jim for bringing this up. I think it's important that this stop versus detention will come up and be vetted as much as we can with the background and limited background, at least from my perspective, that I have, not as a police officer, but as a civilian, and somebody who's supposed to bring the community voice and community values at this table. So to me, what's center is whether or not somebody knows and understands that he or she can go when he has any contact with the police officer. Now, around this table, I see a lot of education, a lot of experience, people that I don't see that they're going to be shy or they're going to be afraid or intimidated by police officers. And yet, I also am hearing that you may not fully understand what stops mean versus detained. If that's happening here, with many of the people out in the community, they do not know which one is stops and which one is detained. If you ask me, somebody is, I just make contact with a police officer, automatically in some communities, that means I can't go anywhere. If the police officer is not going to be asked to tell them you can go anytime you want, and all by themselves not going to offer it, believe me, there are some communities, my community, for example, will not even know that they, in fact, are free to go. I think that what we're looking here is a person with unchallenging authority, meaning a police officer, can have an overstated or abused that authority that we have given the police officer after several weeks of training. So in the end, some of these policies, if not all the policies, are in fact created or developed so to prevent from a few officers that do not understand what's expected of them from keep on doing. This community has certainly seen some of that, unfortunately. But in the end, I'm afraid that we want to move forward, as Commissioner Manning mentioned. The intent of this is two things: is somebody understanding that they can or cannot go, and that the information be captured for us to be able to make corrective actions, or at least the department make corrective action. That's how I see it. If I am oversimplifying, I apologize to all of you who have a lot of knowledge on this subject, but that's what it comes down to. If in fact changing it to stop, so not going to record all these encounters, then I actually rather go back and keep it the way it is, try it out for a while, and come back. The police commission can bring any policy back, as we have stated. The motion was to bring this back in a year, to take a look and see how it's done. But again, I think the way we have it is okay, but obviously even at this table, stops versus detention, it's not clarified.
Thank you. Okay, we have nobody else in the first round, so I'm going to go to Joe.
Okay. I think I have some confusion regarding the motion. Could you state it again?
All contacts that become a stop or arrest must be reported.
Okay. And is that to replace the line in, what is it, 402.4.1 that said all contacts
Yes.
involving a detention?
Oh, you're replacing it?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Because that's,
I'm sorry, that's what I'm replacing. I'm sorry.
I understood that. That's good.
okay. Because I guess my question is that 4-hour experience that I had, and I suppose I should note that I was 50 years old when that happened.
So just yesterday?
Not quite. So I never followed up on that thing. I thought a lot about it and then decided just to let it go. But, so I don't know whether it was recorded or not. So the question is, would that be considered a stop?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have enough information to answer that accurately. If what you're telling me is you were just on the side of the...
It was in a parking lot.
You're in a parking lot? There's so many, I would have to be inferring so many other variables. It could be, it could not be. I don't know. I wasn't there to see it, and I don't think I have enough information to accurately say whether or not it was.
But if you were
I don't want
told
to
you
not
can't
answer.
leave,
I was told I couldn't leave.
then it was a stop.
So, and the question would come down to, why was I stopped?
That's a different, yes, right. It is.
So, I'm working on a car, it's obvious what I'm doing. So the question comes down here. So, I'm a white male in this society, I don't look that scruffy. So the question is, that event may not have qualified in some people's mind as a stop, and therefore, even though it was a 4-hour detention, as the motion is stated, that would not actually get a report.
Yeah, it would have definitely, the officer would have known that it was a stop and would have been required under those circumstances to report.
Okay. So, in other words, how long does the person, there's two things. Number one, if the person doesn't know that they have the right to walk away, and, in my case, I had a car sitting there, so like, what do you do?
Sorry, bro.
But if the person doesn't know that they have the right to walk away and yet are detained for an extended period of time, okay, the motion as it currently is stated would not include a number of those cases, which would then leave the things that Jesse has brought up, that Edward brought up, as, cases where people felt that they were detained, but there is no record of that having occurred. In other words, the motion leaves that set of problems in place. So, I guess that's about all I want to say on that. Thanks.
Okay, we're in the second round still, so James, you're next.
That's a good question. Perhaps we may want to consider something like a time factor in this case. If a person has been contacted and the event is less than 5 minutes, then it doesn't require any kind of recording, because there's not going to be a detention. So now we're really grabbing at straws here, because we're trying to put a time limit on what is acceptable and not acceptable. So Actual conversation is probably, what, a couple of minutes, minute or something like that. I don't know what the formula would be, but I think that that's one of the questions. I think that that Joe has a very valid point there. You know, what the time is there a specific time that we have that would constitute an actual detention or a stop, or if it's just a contact, maybe a minute or something like that, casual conversation, because then we really start to get down into really fine gray areas and stuff. So is it something that say that, okay, if a person is being contacted for 5 minutes or longer, then that would constitute a stop? I don't know. Perhaps it's something that the department may want to look into. I don't know. But it does address the time factor that you were talking about. 4 hours, yeah, that was actually, I don't know why you didn't get, caught it off. 4 hours, that took a lot of time. So I don't want you to happen. You go experience that, but it seems to me very excessive.
Okay, Edward, and then myself.
Yeah, just, first of all, knowing what I know, officer, 4 hours, Costa Mesa, been to Costa Mesa, never been sidelined for 4 hours. But yes, that got recorded somehow because that officer had to account to dispatch for being somewhere for 4 hours and not available for other calls. So that's one thing to remember, is there's other ways that we're capturing data in the department, I would imagine. I don't know if it's being applied to this process, but there are things which are automatically recorded by their nature should we ever want to go back and look at the whole metadata, not just a form that we're filling out here. Break into another point entirely. I dislike the idea of introducing, you must document something if you keep them longer than this time, because an officer gets out of the car and starts an egg timer and knows that if the timer goes off, they now have to do this. If the timer doesn't go off, then they don't have to do this. So A, that's something else for the officer to be thinking about besides what's right in front of them. And B, there's an incentive there to make a decision, arrest, not arrest, detain, not detain, before that egg timer goes off, which might not always be fair to the person they're talking to, or possibly to the officer who then has to defend a quick decision made before the damn egg timer went off. So let's not micromanage like that.
Okay, I have myself, McEwen, and Jim. Claire, sorry, I want to acknowledge your returning to us. I thought you weren't even going to make it tonight, so I'm glad to see you here.
No, it's next month that I'll...
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, then, we are in the middle of a discussion on a motion. The motion was that all contacts that become a stop or an arrest must be reported, and that's to replace the current language on 402.4.1, where we have all contacts must be reported. Okay, so with my issue with the time is, and I agree with Edward, I do not believe that a timing has anything to do with whether or not it's an imposition on the person. First of all, if I'm stopped by a police officer and he says, I need to see your ID, my first question is going to be why. And if he says, I don't have to tell you why, then I say, I don't have to give you my ID. I mean, those are my choices. And a reasonable person should understand that. You are, at some point in your encounter with the officer, you're to ask a question, why am I being stopped? Or what is the reason for you to ask me? Now, you may say, am I free to leave? And that may only take 30 seconds. And he may say, no, you're not. That becomes, beyond that, now as a detention. So it doesn't matter how much time is involved. You could also stand there for 15 minutes and talk to an officer and not involve a detention or stop. You could just be in a conversation with them. So we can't really tie it into time, I don't believe. I believe this motion covers just about anything for now anyway, until we find another issue. I mean, reasonable men disagree on what the word reasonable means. We have learned justices on the Supreme Court who rule every day and change their ruling, I might add, based on the circuit that we see these cases come from, as to what is reasonable on the grounds of a police officer's mind. And what's reasonable suspicion? What is probable cause? These things change. That's what the law is. It's currently fluid and always changing, and I think we have a right here in this city to expect our police to go out and do their job and to be not have to worry about documenting every conversation they have with anybody ever. That's just going beyond the pale. So I would support the motion, and I'm going to speak for it. And next we have Jim.
Well, Bob, I'm glad you let Claire know what because that's one of the reasons I wanted to get in was, because I wanted to hear what Claire's opinion was too, but I wanted to make sure she had, at least knowledge of what we were discussing. But also on the time, I would hate to see a time limit put on a conversation, because to me that's important as just part of getting to know the community is being able to have a conversation between an officer and whether it's a group of person or whether it's an individual, as long as it doesn't turn into a stop or detention. But having that conversation breaks down barriers between, as long, if I'm walking down the street and an officer wants to stop and talk to me and I'm feeling comfortable and I want to have a discussion, or if he wants to stop in and, if he's walking along downtown, he wants to stop in and talk to a merchant or anybody along the street to say, how's your day going? Is there anything we can do better? Can I help you with anything? Just having that good conversation with somebody, getting to know somebody, and maybe, like I said, maybe breaking down some of those barriers that, that people have fear of a police officer coming up and talking to them. It's not always a bad thing. I mean, they may just be, it's just good to get to know your community better, and I think that's a good way to do it. And if to cut off a conversation at 5 minutes or, a certain time, I'm not sure that's of value, especially if it's going well and you're making that good contact. I would just hate to see that with a time limit thrown onto it. So that was my opinion.
Thank you. Okay, I haven't had anybody else ask to speak. I think it's time we vote on the motion. Does everybody understand the motion?
Could you repeat it one more time?
Sure. All contacts that become a stop or arrest must be reported. And that's to replace 402.4.1, the language that was struck.
And that's what's defined in the memorandum that they sent out.
Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, we have 3 noes. And I'm sorry, everybody that voted for it, you had it, okay. Very well. The motion carries, and we're moving on to the next section. 402.4.2, it's reporting information in the stops. And this is the section that we talked about adding as the parameters are set by the committee. I don't know if this is the time for us to, I don't know if the chief has had his information from the committee that he used to decide this, or whether this is a good point to talk about inserting that language in here or not.
It'd be better if you have something inserted.
On this specific section, sir?
I think it'd be better if we send you a document so you can
Okay.
finish product.
Okay, and Mike, you got first in the queue.
I'm sure this will be brought out in the conversations and the documents that we'll see, but I always wonder in a case like this, when an officer is documenting an issue of someone's race, is that something that they glean from a conversation, or is that simply how that person appears to them?
That's what we'll need to decide as we go forward with this. We'll need to decide if we're going to expect the officer to learn from the person that they're stopping or contacting what they say their race is or believe their race is, or do we want to just use the officer's judgment?
And mixed race issues would be solved in a similar fashion, probably?
Yeah, that's a decision that we need to make, how we go about that.
Okay.
There's pros and cons, as you can imagine, both.
I mean, if somebody stopped the president, they would say he appears as an African-American man, but he's of mixed race, half and half. So how would you document that exactly, So I'll be interested to see.
And the way we do it now is we choose a race.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we put in our police report when we enter in the data for the FBI statistics.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, point of information, please.
Just go ahead, yes.
So I just want to be clear on this process that we're using right now. You're going over the changes that were made by the department, or you're going back to each section and asking us for feedback? If it is the second one, I have a few suggested changes. If you're only going to over the changes that the department is bringing, then we're in the right track. I just wanted to be clear on the process that you were using.
So your question was, again? Your point?
Whether or not you going over the changes that were presented by the department, or you in fact are going section by section of the policy. If the second one is true, I would like to then go back and insert a couple of suggestions for the police to contemplate, the police
Okay.
commission.
We're going by policy. We're now on 402.4.2, and we can go back to any section that someone would like to. But right now, I have Edward in the queue, then Juan Carlos, then Claire. Okay, Edward?
I don't think I can go back to the Human Rights Commission and not have asked this question, but in view of Facebook deciding today to allow people to choose up to 50 different gender orientations or identifications on their Facebook identity, how are we collecting what in the city of Eugene? And I recognize that that is not quite the same as being able to look at someone and say, I think they're black. But I also point out that there's two things at play here. There's people's self-identification. I am of mixed race, or I am of this gender. And they tell an officer that. And that is information an officer might take down. But would it allow another officer looking for that same person if they escaped custody to identify them from the physical description? The person says, I'm white, and you're looking at them and they look like maybe they're not, and that a person looking at them and calling 911 wouldn't assume that was the right person. So there's the self-identification and there's the identification we must apply for security reasons. Sorry to throw this can of worms out.
That is the can of worms.
Getting at what I was asking.
Okay, we have Juan Carlos and Claire and then James.
Mr. Chairman, I asked the police commission and commissioner to allow me to present some of the changes in writing, but I want to just go over a couple of things. If I may just pass this around, and public will be able to see them as well if they want a copy. Put it in writing is much easier for me, if you do not mind. So it occurs to me, Mr. Chairman, that we have asked other groups in the community to either provide the police commission with feedback, or they themselves have come forward. ACLU comes to mind, Women's Space, Kids First, CASA, and lately LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. And it occurs to me, Mr. Chairman and police commissioners, that we really don't have any system or processes to in fact respond to that valuable feedback. And I encourage this commission to in fact look at a possible way for us to respond to the valuable feedback. It seems to me that in this policy, it has to really say and be clear on the police officer are strictly prohibited from engaging in racial profiling. Now, I do not see that in this policy, but at the same time, I think we're going to need more direction from the department, whether or not this, in fact, is really broad to just to bias-based policing, or in fact, we're really finally getting at the racial profiling policy that we've been asking for. In fact, today I'm kind of not as clear. I mean, I'm clear on what I want and what I've heard from the department. So I will hope that without even making a motion, that the police department will consider adding specifically police officers are strictly prohibited from engaging in racial profiling. There's other policies, such as the Stephenville, Texas Police Department, that has those statements in there. But here's a couple of changes that I'd like to present or put forward. 402.2, I move that the police department return to the police commission with a recommendation for a definition of area of high crime to be included in the next draft of the professional stops policy.
Do we have a second to the motion? Okay. Motion. Okay.
Second.
Second. Okay, motion is on the floor. We have a motion to amend 402.2. I move that the department return to the police commission a recommendation for the definition of an area of high crime to be included in the next draft of the professional stop policy. So, this motion would ask the department to add a definition of high crime area to this policy. Everybody understand that motion? It's been seconded. Is there discussion on the motion? Jessica?
Can I ask Juan Carlos for clarification about what the motion gets at?
Yes.
I don't see that.
If you
wording.
see the attachment I gave you, it's on the first paragraph. Have you looked at it yet?
Areas of high crime, okay. All right.
You see it? Okay.
Okay, thanks.
That's all the question you have?
Okay, and I'm sorry, but I had Claire and James in the original queue before we got to the motion. So do you wish to speak on the motion, Claire? Okay, and then James.
So, it seems to me that this paragraph that this motion refers to is just, in a sense, describing what a police department does. And I'm not sure the reasoning behind wanting to include a definition, and I'm assuming you're gonna make a motion to add change the definition around suspicious persons. I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish with this motion, Juan Carlos, I guess is my main question.
So because this policy, in fact, is related to which group or which people are being stopped, I want to know which areas, in fact, they're more likely to be stopped. If the police department determines that neighborhood or side of town is higher crime, then I would expect that probably will have more contacts, and therefore assume that maybe there's crime. When I was living in the Whitaker area, some folks described that area as felony flats, and some people thought that was a pretty high crime area. I always felt pretty safe when I was living in that area. So that's what it's getting at. But most importantly, it's also the feedback of the anti-racial profiling committee and recommendation that the police commission is now responding. So this is also my way of honoring their feedback. I think that having a better idea about what does that mean to the police department, which areas are high crime, I think it'll benefit the police commission in the way that we're trying to accomplish this policy.
So I'm hoping you're not asking the chief to come back that says, Bethel, Whitaker, and Trainsong are high crime areas, that it would be, I'm not sure I would support the motion, but since we're engaged in data-driven policing, so it would, in my mind, if we were to adopt this motion, the best outcome would be it would give some context for data and what it points to. But the challenge I have with trying to do that is everything's relative, right? It's higher than some other part of town.
Right.
So what's the cutoff for that descriptor? It's going to always be a moving target.
Sure. And that's the definition itself, in fact, might lend it to, in fact, making a moving target. I'm not looking at the police department coming back and say that specific area is. But in fact, what is it? What makes it a high crime area? In fact, if you ask me, in my neighborhood, in Crest Drive, there's been a lot of break-ins. People broke into my house 2 times in the year and a half that I was there. And yet, that would probably not be considered a high crime area. But if you ask my neighbors, they will say, well, yeah, there's a lot of things going on here. It is the data, and even though it's moving target, I'm not necessarily looking to name a specific neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that, sir. And we have James, Mike, and Jim in the queue.
Yeah, I kind of struggle to connect the relevancy of that to include it in this particular policy. I don't see crime is like a water balloon. It drifts. If you put pressure on one side, then it'll go to the other side, and it's forever moving around. So I can't see. I think that's the data itself, and the police and the chief does that with his report. Every week he gives, or every month he gives us a profile of areas of crime. You see the high crime areas and stuff, and those are not consistent. They shift, and it depends. When the bad guys are locked up, crime goes down in that area. When they're released, crimes probably go back up. So I can't see how that connects with this particular policy. So I would not be supporting this.
Okay, then we have Mike, Jim, and then I'm in the queue.
Thank you. I have a number of thoughts reading this. The first one is that I'm thankful that the chief has, over the last couple of years, led the department towards data-led policing. I think that's been a very wise use of resources and a great way to be more efficient and effective at their work. I think in that lies the potential to maybe give Juan Carlos and a little more comfort around your particular concern here, at least from my perspective. I would think we could recommend to him that based on current, because it's always going to be a moving target, so based on current statistics or current data that the chief contains, you know, we could recommend some manner of language that based on the data-led policing information gives him an idea of what a higher crime area is at any particular given time. The other thing I would say is based on some of the language of this, I understand your concerns in wanting to get this a little tighter. I could agree with a lot of that. My only challenge with the form of the motions in 1, 2, and 3 that I've seen here so far has a kind of tone that says the police commission wants the department to report back to us. The challenge that I have with that is that the appropriate role of the police commission is to advise the chief before he decides on what the policy is, rather than for him to be subordinate to the police commission deciding what it ought to be. And so I would think that it's more appropriate for our role to give him input and say, hey, you know, this language challenges us and we may want to make it more effective for the community if it said something like this instead. For him to consider that rather than setting up a kind of dynamic where we're asking him to report back to us. That gives me a little concern. But I would share your goal with trying to get the language tighter so we're clearer about what we mean.
Mr. Chairman, would you mind if I respond?
No, I can't have that. I got to keep going around the queue here because I don't want to get into individual debate. I'm sorry. Okay. Jim, you're next.
Well, I wanted to ask Juan Carlos for a clarification on this before I comment. On the information that you handed out for your motion, the very last 3 words say professional stops policy. Is there a professional stops policy?
No, that was a typo.
Okay.
The actual policy would
No, that's what I wanted to find. That's one clarification I wanted to make there. And I don't know if I can support it either because I know it is a moving target. And I know, and I believe the chief focuses in on different. I mean, if we look at our map, I mean his map, not that's up there every day, but one that he provides to us in our packet, you know, the highest crime area is downtown. Consistently, always. And I don't think it matters how many officers you devote to it, that's always going to be the highest crime area. But I also know that he focuses in on other areas around town
For different crime.
that are considered that he would like to reduce crime in. And I would hate to have all the focus always, because it's always the highest crime area, be downtown rather than other areas, because I think it's pretty hard to, a lot of times, to impact that downtown area, because it always is highest, and not be able to focus in on the other areas where there is a higher level of crime than maybe there are other parts of town, but it's not the highest crime area in town. So I kind of get concerned that if we say that, if we put a definition in what high crime is, it's the highest crime area in town, all that focus is always going to be downtown and never anywhere else. So that's where I have the trouble there. So I guess that's my comments.
Okay. I'm going to take myself out and go to Edward.
I was going to propose a friendly amendment, but you talked me out of it. I was going to suggest we substitute statistically higher for high, and then I realized it's the same problem. There's going to be an instance at some point, something's going to happen in this town, something that really upsets people, and it should, but it isn't going to be statistically high, and we would tie the chief's hands by saying, I'm sorry, you cannot focus a lot of resources on that because it's not statistically higher. So I'm not even going to move forward with that. I think Claire put it well that this paragraph defines the operation of a police department. So I feel a little funny voting on redefining how a police department functions at this body. I'm not sure that's really our job. Every department deploys officers to areas of high crime in order to accomplish reducing crime. So I'm not sure why we're parsing the words in this. That's all.
And then Juan Carlos is maker of the motion again, if you want to expand.
Yeah, I appreciate specifically Mike's comments because that, in fact, it's really kind of getting at the main concern. The problem is the database policing is not actually, maybe something's changed, but it's not actually public. This has been, we've been previewed as police commission with that information. At some point I did ask whether that was public or not, and I was actually told, no, it's not. So I also don't want to focus our attention in a specific area. That's not what I'm getting at. This, in fact, is a moving target, but in the absence of having access to those areas, in fact, elected officials might, in fact, benefit from making that public. That really is my point. I, too, concur with you 100%, Mike, that this body, in fact, is designed to provide specific feedback and in many cases specific language to policies, and I actually kind of wrestle with that, whether to in fact have this body try to create a language and of course recommend it to the police department. If I remember correctly, when I was the chair of the policy screening review committee, we established a partnership, and I think that worked very well. It'll be down the line whether or not that in fact will work in the future or not. But what we established was that so the police department would capture the essence and the interest of the police commission and come back and say, well, I'm reflecting your values of what you're suggesting. So that I'm going based on those kind of set of agreements in a collaboration manner. Had I known that maybe that's lost, and of course I would be willing to come back and say, here's a specific language that we want to do. So I was also conflicted by that, but I figure as giving the department more freedom to say this is what worked for us, I come back and make the recommendation back to the police commission. The policy itself, this is not something that we created. Right. The policy itself is a department came up with it. And we're actually saying, well, can you change this or can you capture what I really want to see in this? So there's no different than this. So I just want to make that part of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on this motion? I want everybody to have their say here. Does anybody else have anything to say? Hearing no further, I'll take a vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand.
I'll vote for that.
All opposed? Motion is defeated. And our next, that vote, by the way, that was a demonstration. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. That was a demonstration of what I wanted everybody to do, not my vote. So,
Mr. Chair.
So I did not vote for the motion. That was just my demonstrating how. Yeah, I fixed it. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mike?
May I just say that I would have voted in favor of something that was cleaner or clearer in the way, in trying to accomplish, I think, where you're going, which is that we don't want ambiguity to be a place where, we don't want ambiguous language in this such that it could create misunderstandings between the public and between the department in the work they're doing. We want as clear a possible language so that when they say this is why we did what we did, everybody gets it real clearly and goes, oh, and they don't have any kind of mistrust over whether or not they were using wiggle words. I would agree with you that making that clear is important. I'm just not sure that that was the most efficient way to do it in this case, but I would support doing that.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, and that dovetails nicely into the second point on Carlos's sheet, which is defining suspicious persons and circumstances, a definition of that. So, Juan Carlos, do you have a motion in that regard?
I do. Mr. Chairman, I move that the police department report to the police commission how the definition of suspicious person and circumstances is being defined operationally during the pilot program phase, and that it can be used for the draft policy.
Does the motion have a second? Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion is dropped. Okay, well. We have a second and a motion. We have discussion on this motion. Any discussion? Juan Carlos, I'll give you first because you're the maker of the motion.
Thank you. So, looking at all the policies, they're obviously they're trying to define what a suspicious person is in terms of the overall public safety. So, but it's not actually defined here. If an officer is going to stop somebody because he or she is a suspect, I don't think that is understood to me. If they're talking about the behavior itself, then I think that might help the policy itself better, rather than, in a general sense, suspicious persons. So I really am looking for that definition. What does that mean? The officer that is out there in public and they see specific actions, I'm looking at what exactly are how are they activating their next step. And throughout some of the policies that I looked at with EPD, I don't see that defined anywhere. And I think it's going to be important for us to detach in this case, the race of a person or what they look from their behavior. And at this point, I'm focusing more on how the person looks like and not on the behavior. So I want the department to, in fact, make a distinction between the two, so that if they're after, say, Latinos, then they're not going after Latinos because they're Latinos, that they're going after Latinos because of the behavior or they're suspicious for whatever reason.
Okay, I have Joe, Mike, James, and apparently Edward now in the queue.
Yeah, I think that this gets right to the heart of the whole question of bias, in the sense of why does the person appear suspicious? Is it based on race? Is it based on socioeconomic circumstances? And so I think that's really the core of the whole thing. I mean, if we're looking at the whole issue of bias-based policing, this is it, right here, is why would someone be suspicious and not someone else? So that's my question. So I think we do need better clarification on this.
Okay, we have Mike, James, and Edward.
Thank you, because like the Constitution was written and then the Bill of Rights was written as negative rights. In other words, this is the stuff that you specifically can't do, right? There is definition in this about inappropriately racially profiling or bias-based profiling. And there's definitions around what you can't do. And that, for me, makes me sufficiently comfortable with this. And the reason is that the next logical question of an officer about, well, did you stop this? Why did you stop this person? Because they were suspicious. What made them suspicious? Now, if anything that they say falls into what's clearly defined as prohibited, then obviously that officer is in the wrong. Mm-hmm. I would want to give them great latitude that, for example, we're at a 90-degree day, the guy's wearing a heavy coat, doesn't matter what color he is, that could be a suspicious circumstance in and of itself, that he may be hiding something and wearing a heavy coat on a very hot day. I'm perfectly willing to let that language stand, and the only reason is because the stuff we don't want them to do is specifically defined. And their behavior as an officer can't escape the catch-22 that's inherent in the next question. Well, what made them suspicious?
Mm-hmm. Okay, James, and then Edward.
Thank you. I listened to a lot of excellent stuff. I mean, what does constitute suspicion? And I would submit that it depends. It depends on a number of things, and to try to put this into a specific language would be very difficult. It depends on the judgment of the officer. It depends on the situation. It depends on the information that the officer receives. It depends on what a person is doing. For example, like Mike has given, if he's walking around in 70-degree weather with a big coat on and his arms and stuff are kind of inside of his pocket or inside of the coat. So trying to determine specific language and to define that, ultimately it's going to come down to the officer's judgment. The officer is out there on patrol. What actually is suspicious? What is suspicious activity? Is it the report that you just received? Is it an act or incident that you just see that happened, that this person just committed right in front of you? Is it something that looks like it's going to go down, and because of all of the circumstances, everything's aligned up for a bank robbery? They're scoping out the place. This guy's been hanging on the corner for the last 10 minutes, writing down, making phone calls and all these things. This is going to be very difficult because it comes down to the individual officer to make that call. And while I agree that, a definition is that, I don't think that we can actually put a definition on that because it's going to come down to the actual officer. It's going to be the officer's judgment. It is worth talking about, what does initiate suspicion, but I don't think that we can capture that in this language because we can expand this more and more, and we can throw in all kind of variables and stuff, and before you know it, it's watered down, and nobody's going to get anything. Like Edward said, if we keep it as simple as possible, then that's going to help the officer because it's not going to be that ambiguous to them when they're out there trying to do their job. More importantly, what I'm concerned about is that are we trying to put a product together that's going to make the officer skittish or not able to perform their job because they're thinking that, okay, if I do this, then it's probably going to be conceived as I violated this policy, so we're not going to really enforce anything, and then the counter happens that we don't want to happen. They don't get involved, crime goes up, because they're afraid that we have a citizen group here that's trying to bound their hands by saying that you must do specifically these things. I think that we need to be very careful as we go through this process and stuff, because again, it comes down to it's going to be that officer out on the street that comes in contact that has to make that judgment. And if we are concerned that we don't have capable people out there, then perhaps we need to go back and just look at our hiring practices and stuff, make sure that we are getting the right people and that they're properly trained.
Okay. I have Edward, George, and I'll get you in the chief after Edward, and then Juan Carlos.
Again, Juan Carlos, I think what you're trying to accomplish here is to protect people from basically being unreasonably or arbitrarily messed with, whether they're profiled or whether the officer is just bored that afternoon and has 4 hours to kill in Costa Mesa. The thing is that there's a huge, correct me if I'm wrong, Jesse, there's a huge body of case law that defines what reasonable suspicion is. And the bad old days where an officer can get up on the stand and say, the guy looked hinky to me, so I stopped him. That's not a defense anymore for the officer, I think. So I'd love to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish here, but I'm really, really concerned that by the time the officer has gone through the whole checklist of what am I allowed to consider as suspicious, either the crime has happened or the person has moved on. There's such a huge variable about what's suspicious when. I walked out of a store in Seattle in the 1970s, was promptly, half a block up the street, put on the sidewalk at gunpoint because a guy who looked a lot like me and dressed a lot like me had just robbed a store 3 blocks away. Once they established who I was and that I had in fact come out of that store right there, here's my item and so on and so forth, they did something very smart. They went on the air and said they'd stop this guy who looked like him and that he was now going to be walking home to his address at such and such. Then the officer gave me his card and his call number on it and said, you're going to get stopped again on the way home, because not everybody heard that call. Now, am I still suspicious after the first stop? Yeah, I am, to the other officers who don't know I'm not the guy. I'm not suspicious to the guys who just stopped me. So how do we protect people from that kind of situation with a paragraph? I don't know. I agree we need to protect people from being stopped for biased reasons. The whole of this policy is designed to accomplish that in the whole year-long process. So I'm a little concerned about loading a lot of very fine-tuning on at the front end and finding we've created something that is either unworkable right out the gate or that collapses, as the chief said, somewhere down the road. And that doesn't make anybody happy at all. That's my thoughts.
Okay.
Okay, George?
I love the intention of this. In practicality, it would be very difficult. I did once see a really detailed show on my behavioral scientist trying to write software to, be able to have cameras pick out suspicious software or suspicious behavior. And they came back, it was impossible to do. What the mind processes, the incredible amounts of things that it goes through to pick up suspicious behavior is really a difficult task. And I see certain things and I get suspicious and I review them. Why did I get suspicious? Or somebody wants to write a check and the way they moved, I said, nah, not a check from you in my business is because there was just some kind, I can't, if I back up and replay that, why did that happen? So I love the intention, but I think, again, in practicality, it would be so difficult. And I'll even go to one step further, saying I think it would be a little bit of a micromanage of our officers on the street. Thank you.
Chief?
It's really difficult to know what the intent of the motions are because all we know is what the motion is. We don't know what has driven it. And there's probably good reasons, so I don't doubt the intent, but we don't know what it is. And in negotiations, contract negotiations, there's an approach known as interest-based bargaining where the parties get on the table what it is they fear or what it is they hope to accomplish, and then you can very efficiently design the language that addresses those things. So if we knew what the fear or what the concern was or of the suspicious persons or the high crime area, we could probably put a word here or there or delete a word here or there, and it might be a more efficient approach. This has been a pretty involved discussion about a couple of things in one paragraph, and I'm just concerned that we may not get very far if we continue in this way. This isn't my business, it's yours. I'm a third party kind of, observing how your conversation is going. And I could even suggest something that might quickly deal with the suspicious persons, if I knew what the fear was. And then another thing to keep in mind is that this paragraph is really just it's not a policy statement, it's really just an operations statement. This is how we are approaching our work. With that in mind, understand that we expect our officers to contact as many people that we think they should be spending their time with as possible. And as the attorneys in the room can tell you, volumes and volumes and shelves of Supreme Court decisions have gotten to the question of what the word suspicion means. It would be hard if you voted to approve the motion. I wouldn't know where to begin. It could go on and on and on to define what a suspicious person is. On the other hand, if I knew what the concern was that led to the motion, I could delete a word, I could add a word that might address that.
Okay, Juan Carlos, you're next in the queue. I want you to understand we are going to give every one of these issues that are concerned to you and the organizations who brought this to us to begin with a fair hearing. We want that to be aired in this public forum for people and commissioners to put their input. We only have 3 minutes left allotted in this time frame before we move on to the next on our agenda. I can take a motion to extend time, but if I do, we're going to be here late because we still have to get the rest of the agenda in. So I sense that this is going to take a lot longer to get through this policy with the issues that are concerned here. I want to give you the opportunity to defend that. Perhaps we could go from the premise in the beginning of this policy, 402.1, which says this policy states unequivocally that bias-based police profiling in Eugene Police Department will not be tolerated. So we have a premise in the beginning. Now, that's what we are building on here, and we want the commission input on what we're building on. But we cannot strictly define enough parameters, I don't think, in the time that we have to approve this, to actually say every single circumstance where this might be considered. I mean, we've all heard the stories about driving while black, driving while Latino, driving while Asian in certain areas of certain countries, certain areas of the country. People claim that that is, you know, that there's a bias there, that that's why I'm being stopped. And, you know, absent proof of that, sometimes we don't know. And it's possible it's true. And so what we're trying to do is define a fair policy. And we cannot possibly define everything in the policy. What I'm asking is, can we get to some middle ground here where everybody can decide what is fair for everyone in the community, for all of us, as representing the community, to say what is fair for our community. So I'm going to cut off debate now because we've only got 1 minute left. I'm going to take the vote on the motion.
I believe as I was in the queue, and I think we have 3 more minutes on the time,
Well,
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, that clock's wrong. We'll do that for a moment. So go ahead.
Thank you. I actually appreciate the comments from the chief in terms of presenting the intent. I think that will help not only me, but other members that might come forward with motions to state what the intent is. Of course, there's always intent, and there's so much time that we have. With all the respect to the chair and to the commission, any commissioner can bring and in fact make any motions on anything, and in fact we can request things whether it's approved or not. But that's the prerogative of each commissioner, with all the respect to the chair. In regards to the intent itself, is, as you, in fact, you stated perfectly, any policy is stated on the intent, and the tone of the rest of the policy is usually stated in the first 1 or 2 paragraphs. The absence of, in fact, stating clearly that police officers are strictly prohibited from engaging in racial profiling, that, in fact, if that was right in the front and prominent, the expectation, probably some of these motions may not has come as forward. But in fact, let me share with you the intent. The intent is that I wish that the community will speak up in terms of actually presented itself into preventing officers from using suspicion to detain or stop people of color, because that's been the story and the perception of this community. So, and I understand that, you know, the chief's mentioning about suspicious persons. There's many aspects about what constitutes a suspicious person, whether somebody's wearing too many coats and it's 100 degrees. That's what I've read. Somebody who is hauling property, somebody who's going door to door, somebody who's forcing their way into a locked vehicle. All of those things can, in fact, be considered suspicious. But in fact, what we're trying to get at this point is that we're not using the pretext or pretense of suspicious to stop anyone who is a person of color. So I appreciate the chief kind of getting into bringing what the intent is. I will probably need to do that more so you understand it. But I cannot be the one educating all of you. You guys also need to be out there reading some of the policies, so I encourage you to do that as well.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to go ahead and vote on the motion now. All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand.
Would you restate the motion, please?
Oh, sure.
This
is number 2 on the information that Juan Carlos has provided to us. The motion was made to define, include the police commission definition of suspicious persons and circumstances to be defined operationally in the policy. Seconded by Jesse.
I was asking the police department to report to the police commission how the definition of suspicious
Correct.
person is not the police commission defining it. We're asking police department to bring it back to the police commission. That's a big change.
Okay, everybody clear on that? All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. All opposed? And all those who abstain? Everyone abstains. Motion defeated. We're moving on to the next item, which is approval of the minutes. The commissioners have any corrections to the minutes? The minutes are provided in the packet.
My understanding, I could be wrong, I've been wrong before. Once, turns out I was mistaken.
Not that kind of thing usually.
That's right.
Oh, when did that happen?
That was wrong. And George.
We have, the commissioners have been
Cats and
provided
dogs
the
living
minutes.
together.
Can I have some order here, please, Mike?
Sorry.
The commissioners have been provided the minutes, and have any of you found any corrections that need to be made to the minutes? Hearing no corrections, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
So make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
George, seconded by James. And, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Yesterday.
Okay, the motion carries, and we're on break. Take a few minutes to relax.
You ever heard that?
Yesterday.
Reminding
You're still
everyone that
alive?
this tape
I thought you
runs.
would have had a heart attack.
Well, I was afraid it
Videotape
was
is
gonna,
still on, everyone, for
I was afraid it was gonna get really damn cold.
Thank you for that reminder.
I thought maybe hell had exactly frozen over. You know, I was a little afraid.
So what was the,
Thank you
No.
for thanking me, and I want to ask the question.
I'm trying to remember what it was now.
Was there a vote?
asked me.
Oh, it's
So this is unasked for.
residential zone.
But if you're willing to sit down sometime and talk tactics,
I'm not happy sure though, so.
maybe things we can each learn.
And Betty and George.
Okay. You will be coming, I assume, more human rights.
So me and Edward and Juan Carlos come.
that had to have passed unanimously.
Two citizens, two friends talking about how to accomplish things we're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
Things I heard from a lot of people here tonight.
George, how you doing? How you doing?
Good. What you were trying to do, but not how it came to pass here tonight in the time available. That's just.
Can I do some?
That's just logistics. When people agree,
590, or no,
yet you don't get the vote.
1120 crew?
Something needs to be adjusted. There's somebody wrong. There's some barrier there.
And,
So that's all. It's not like I have to bang my head against the way that I bring things into
I
meetings.
chat with them.
It always takes courage to do it.
Yes.
John okay, but he's starting to do it in the evening or after I am. His health isn't as good as it should be. KKNX.
In the morning, I pulled out a report. Joe and,
I listen to my Pandora in my car. I don't like advertisements.
well, I don't, that's why I switched. Yeah, as soon as one comes on, I switch over.
How things with the credit union?
Going well, very busy. Right, exactly. Kind of squeezing in everything the first half of the year, the second half of the year. Getting ready to really go to this collection area downtown. Everybody's the one we're building is down there by Federal Courthouse.
You know, that was built so.
They all are expected.
Have you heard that story?
Federal buildings, federal buildings, their own.
So,
For our buildings, their own.
your new building.
Okay.
I mean, I got proof. I don't know what. One of my buddies plays tennis, but they don't play anymore because they hurt his back. Won't play in the morning. And guy named Bill Woods.
Oh, yes.
Bill Woods and I go back for a long time. He says, I really want your business. That's real correct. I said, Bill, you're not going to get my business because you don't have a convenient location. I need something in between my shops. He says, I'm going to make it happen. What can I say? It happened. He's a man.
Now what are you gonna do?
Well, I may have an out here, by the way, I don't change businesses because I get a better offer. And, I was a poster boy from Federal. If you knew that. They treat, I was with Liberty and then they changed to Home Federal. Home Federal is sold again. And were bought out. And I was impressed when Liberty changed to Home Federal that the people that I dealt with, Mike Grunham, stayed there. And I had another friend in the background, Joy, loving her. And they treated her real decent, so I didn't change. But if they change and don't treat them, you know, I don't deal with the bank, I deal with the people in the bank. So it's definitely on my,
Depending what happens.
depending on what happens, yeah.
We might be seeing our doors.
Bill has,
We'll be working on you.
Bill, by the way, has, I think he has probably the highest integrity of anyone I've ever met. All the way to, one night we were playing tennis in this game. We were, times I dominate, times he dominates. Pretty equal. He's actually pretty good athlete. And his game was just, what's wrong? Nothing. Nothing. I said, Bill, there's nothing bothering. I'm nothing bothering. I said, okay, we're going to talk. Because he's just as fair. I said, what's not fair? Just as fair getting over here. He says, we don't do this. If you're old and you don't have an income, your credit score goes down and we charge more for loans. That just isn't fair. And it was just eating at him so bad. So anyway, actually his son-in-law works.
Will does?
Will does. He's a good guy. He's worked for 17 years. As a matter of fact, Will was kind of looking for a job, and I told Bill I'm looking for somebody, and Will got hired. And in 3 months, I gave Bill $500 credit.
There you go.
Finder's fee. So,
Oh, pretty good. How are you doing?
so I noticed, I couldn't help but notice that you parked in a handicap. Problem with legs?
I'm 90% service connected disabled. You go to the service station. I don't sit for long periods of time. I stand up. Very uncomfortable at times, so but I try not to let go. So sometimes I walk, and I can only walk so long, so far. I don't use it all the time, but I do use it occasionally, especially when I have the moments and stuff. But anyway, sleep apnea, you know, I got CPAP machines, and all that.
I got my throat ring, see? No, you can. It just took that sucker right out. Well, sore operation, because I didn't want to wear the CPAP. What a pain in the ass.
Did the operation work?
For a while. Yeah, they told me. My wife kind of got on me too.
I stopped breathing.
Right. Yeah. I have long, oh God, they got doctors. You know, an hour period you stop breathing 90 times.
Yeah. So you went for the sleep study.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I did that. When I went to sleep study, they said that's really smart. We had time for you to come to the you to stop. You know that you can go without breathing. You didn't have anything to do. You know, football is boring. You know where the excitement is. I guess I'm falling asleep. Slowing down. These are all
Well, that's good news to hear. Yeah, he said something. Well, I like hearing that.
Because the rest of the talks are all the time.
That's even better. Yeah, exactly.
I do know, a little more from my sleep apnea. I would fall asleep in unusual places. In the most unusual place, this was the first interviews a lot of people daily, day in, day out. High stress area. So I got audited by the IRS. And I'm in the federal courthouse downtown. My accountant chooses not to show up like he said he would. So just her and I. And anyway, I'm falling asleep. I fell asleep. said, you know, she was, I hate to say, she was delightful. Yeah, we had a lot of fun. She did kind of cancel it. It's $500. All one for it. I said, well, that was down payment to pay our parts delivery company. What is that? Mercedes. She said, this is a can of worms I don't want to get in on. That was the only thing And I looked over next to me, and there's a woman asleep in her car. And I went up and I pounded on a window, and she's still dead. And I called 911. And another gal came. I was not going to open up the door and touch her. Just, I'm smart that type of thing.
I'm above average. I'm sorry.
No. I don't think so.
But anyway, sleep apnea.
Oh, that's no fun. Do the Darth Vader I've been, knock on wood, I've been lucky. I mean, I never suffered insomnia. I sleep like a freaking rock. My ex-wife tells me I snore a bit. Yeah, well, that's not the reason. We'll go with that.
Oh, crap. Have that many more hours to day.
One day I'm going to give you in my professional capacity as someone who wants to does work and talk to me. Had on as a until your eyes have the pipes think about these two hits so that they can put fiber. You have to embrace talking to John Brown and everybody else. God love him. I love that man. He is like a Christmas freaking news. But you know, we've been working real hard to try and get it set up so that it's possible for you to money these payments allow those abandoned steam pipes to be used to run fiber to get high speed into downtown.
I know that you're talking about.
I'm working on that. We'll talk more about it maybe at some point, because if something comes before the board at some point, because I want to make sure that I've had a chance to tell you what my guys are hoping to do. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I mean, if we could do that in our downtown, it could transform, not just is it good for my client, but it could transform the kind of sort of downtown high-tech opportunities that they're really ramp it up, because that capacity would add a whole nother traffic at this level. Right. Why people want to
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that's important.
No, thank you. I already had a bunch of them. Friends with Jack. He did that shot. What the hell? I say no. I don't know him. Nope. I have
limited amount. If I don't know somebody, not my friend.
Right. I don't accept. Well, I just. I didn't know him.
Years ago, when I was in school, they didn't do all this. It's fun.
Come to council, you know.
Oh, I know.
Look, I don't know.
It's fun being the rest.
But you just seem like somebody I probably ought to know. And she says, well, I figured since you're council, you would probably say, you know, hey, I appreciate you. Yeah, I get 100 of those, I'm just like, yeah, I don't know what these are.
Money's the ones that I have on my committee, I had a couple that I allowed in, and then I saw some of the posting that I went back and said, no, gotta take it down.
This is a political Well, yeah, it's not financially responsible.
Yeah, what do you know? What do you know? You and I agree.
So which,
There's another possibility.
I am an average sized man. I know this. I am an average sized man. I was short when I was young. I'm an average.
so I was like, you don't have to get
Well, I love it. I was quick, but I wasn't. Yeah, sure. I was going to make back, but what was it, the 70s? Betty said something about ticket or something like that. She could think back to a time when, you know, she got parking tickets in town, and the line ended up being $1. And I said, I asked to sit up the cameras on everything. Betty, where did you park your horse? I thought it was
No time with Dave, right? Yeah.
That one time, I said it came out. Yeah, right. It just came out from myself. Did I say that out loud? That one got out faster than I could think of. No, I'm young, wallflower, shy. That's her.
We need to get back to, back in order, please. Ladies, gentlemen.
Now you tell him.
Can we get back to the table, please?
Hey, Bob, I set the clock.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now we're definitely behind.
I've been known to go around setting clocks in the locker room and other boards I'm in.
Thank you.
Are you, so you're talking about the
Thank you, Mike.
How you doing, Jack?
Someday you're gonna have one of those hammers to it.
Well, well, your mouth to God's ears, brother.
And it's gonna be worn out on one end. you can tell.
Polo ballot.
And if it's worn out, it's a good sign.
Okay.
Little ballots of Thor.
Yeah. Thor's hammer. I said, order.
Oh, I am?
Yes,
The next order of business on the agenda is questions for the chief. You all have a copy of the report in your file. We've changed the way we're doing that now, and everybody has the crime maps and the various highlights in front of them. Any questions, any issues, or problems? We hear James first.
Yeah, it's not well, it's more like a question. I know that in the past that the chief has provided an update that comes out monthly or something like that, that you could. So I would ask that all of the commissioners and stuff, since that is public record, it's open to the public because it's out there on the airwaves and stuff, that commissioners take that opportunity to kind of share that with some of your constituents and stuff, via email. Normally what I do is I email it out, so more people get it, they can see it for themselves. So that's part of sharing the information, which is part of our charge as police commissioners, to make sure that our community members are in the know about what's going on with the police department. So I appreciate you doing that. Looking forward to more of it. Little kind of dancing figures and stuff will probably be nice too. To touch.
Mike?
The two Willamette High School students, are you at liberty to say, or was that in any way a gang-related incident?
I don't think it was gang-related.
Okay. I guess that for me falls into the larger spectrum of that being an issue that there's some heightened awareness on in the last couple of years, and as it pertains to schools, that has more concern for me. So I just wondered if there was any kind of connection.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I have one. Carlos, Edward, and Tim.
Two things. First, a comment to the chief. I noticed that you've been out there even more. I don't know where you find the time to do so, but I appreciate seeing you. I personally have seen you in different events. The last one being at the MLK. Not only you, but the mayor and other elected officials and non-elected officials were there. So that's good to see you there. My question to you is related, in fact, to gang activity. I remember the last time something was done was around this actual symposium. Is that right? And the second part of the LCC. Can you share where you are in any of next steps?
Are you able to? Yeah.
There is the Lane County Gang Prevention Coalition is moved from planning and talk to operational plans for service delivery. And there is a group of service providers that has continued to meet that are dealing with intervention and services for folks. And that work continues with the same leadership, and EPD isn't as involved because EPD isn't, we're more on the when everything else fails end of the spectrum.
So it's an intervention and prevention approach, and it's a grant-funded committee. There's one staff person working on to support the committee's work. And, if the commission wishes, you could get a presentation from the committee on the progress of the work.
That'd be good. Thank
Okay,
you, Chief.
I had Edward, afterward comes Jim, Joe.
Not a question from this report, but just from the storm, and thank you for the call on Friday. I know in other cities, when they have a weather emergency, the city actually puts together an ad hoc command post that lets the different agencies cooperate. Did Eugene activate something like this? Did we reach that level this time? And if so, what's the department's role out in the street in that? Obviously not doing traffic stops.
Yeah, not very many. Most of the work in the storm is done by police after the initial traffic crashes that happen. We spend most of our time pushing cars out of the intersection and off a bridge or overpass. Most of the work is done by Public Works. And then because of the nature of this last storm where there was a heavy freezing rain and branches and electrical cables came down, the bulk of it was done by the fire department and the utilities. So Public Works, Fire, and Utilities, and police just went to stand by where there were down power lines. We didn't know if they were alive. There was, our 911 center served as a command post for the fire department. The Public Works uses what they call an emergency command center, which they have at their site. And then, as I understand it, I haven't seen it, eWeb has a command site that they set up. And I think the next step, and it might have even been appropriate this last weekend, would have been to have a unified command where eWeb and the city departments were together in one place. And service may have been delivered a little more proficiently that way this last weekend, but it was definitely an improvement over the first snowstorm we had.
Yes.
And if we could get a third one this year, I think we'd really, I think we'd see some blue chip
The
performance.
city manager assured us. It was
Yeah, the more you get to
Tonight.
practice it, it's better. I just know that in these other cities, first of all, they'll convene one of these command centers kind of at the drop of a hat, precisely because when you've got the different people working out of the same table, you catch things that went on over in that command center that nobody heard in this command center, so there's that advantage.
Yeah, I think we should be a little more ready to convene that command center.
The other thing I'd just suggest from working with disaster readiness in other cities is, this may sound a little crass, but on the protect and serve variable, there's so many people that see police only as enforcement. They don't really see the protect and serve. And I know that weather emergencies are something that do bring people together, and that they like to see their public agencies out doing something a little differently because that has happened. So what you're telling me is people did see that. And just thinking about ways the department could work, and this commission could work, since we do public outreach, a little harder in these emergencies, making the public aware of how they can make the public safety workers' jobs easier, and maybe a little bit more appreciation for the fact that they're out there in the cold and the rain and away from their families who might be without power for days. Just some thoughts.
Okay, we have Jim and then Joe, and then I'll make you after that.
Well, I had 4 questions. I think they're pretty brief, though. One of them was about the KEZI current issues comment that you had. Were those KEZI's issues or EPD's issues that were brought up in that?
Or were they more personal issues?
Or were they, well, they could have. Any of the 3.
I get studies and magazine, newspaper articles clipped and sent to me every day. And so I kind of pick them out and compile them in a document. And then at the end of a month or 2, I see what the trends are. So I appeared on KEZI to talk about gun legislation that's gone on around the country, and then the new marijuana laws and the inconsistency between what's being permitted in states and what the federal government's position is on it, and how that's creating difficulties for the banking, the financial industry.
I'm sure Bill and I are in that same boat, yeah.
Yeah, and then also technology that's happening in law enforcement these days.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to try and do that more often. We learn, everybody in law enforcement, everybody in any field learns a lot by following the journals.
And the next question was on the 4-week citywide percentages. That's on a couple of the other graphs too. You say 5 calls on the 9 log, and then it says comma 4 thefts. What does that mean? I don't know what the 9 log is. So.
The 9 log is it's where telephone reports are taken. So what the person who developed this report is telling us that they're not only the crimes that are in the table that I don't know what page you're on, but there are not only those crimes that are in the table that you're referring to that you see, but also there's other crimes that haven't been reported and therefore aren't in the data yet.
Oh, okay.
That are in the 9 log.
Okay. And I was really kind of surprised at how much crime dropped last week, or this week as compared to last week. when I was looking at those numbers, is that just because some haven't?
No?
We've learned to not,
Oh, well,
yeah, we've learned not to rely too much on those numbers. The weather could have something to do with it, but also sometimes the reporting doesn't catch up for a week or two.
and that's what I wondered. Okay.
Yeah,
But yeah, the snow
almost
would-
always the
yeah.
most recent week looks good, and you feel good about it for a second or two, and then the numbers
Then
catch
it's back up again? Yeah, okay. And then last question was, I was looking at on the personnel side, the new job postings.
Mm-hmm.
4 of them all appear to be communications.
Yeah.
Is that a new department, or is that just a fluke that the communications area has 4 openings all at once?
We have, well, no, we had some retirements in,
Okay.
in tech services. And then there's always, unfortunately, a lot of turnover in the 911
So
center.
this is the 911 center?
Yeah, most of the turnover is with people who are on probation. That's where you want it to be.
Yes.
you know, But it's
Yes.
also, but it's also really typical of 911 centers. It's
Okay.
hard to find one that's able to retain full staffing for very long.
Okay, so this is the 911 center.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if this was people that are like communicating to the public is where I wasn't sure.
Yeah, we had a systems analyst that went to another job. We had another systems analyst that retired. The lead positions are new leads. The former leads weren't interested in the work any longer. It's a tough job. The communications supervisor recently retired.
It kind of looked like a whole department because it kind of had almost all the layers of people. So I'm like,
Oh, this is just a few of them.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, I was sort of curious as I looked through this. You divided into 6 beats, and I was wondering if there's any information on the number of people and businesses in each one of those beats, so that you could sort of make a quick mental conversion to per capita and see whether, because it looks like some areas are a little higher, but, you know, if the population's lower or the number of businesses is different, then that would sort of give a different way to interpret those numbers.
We haven't done it that way. We probably could. We're a long way from having that time to be able to do that sort of work. It is interesting, though. Another way we've looked at this is in density maps.
Okay.
So we know that assaults are creeping up, and they have been since 2008, and almost everywhere in the country that's the case. Nobody totally understands why. But we overlaid our assault maps with density maps, and we can see that there's probably a correlation. It's probably domestic violence that we're seeing going up, and then in parks and other public spaces. But the kind of work you're suggesting, we haven't done.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm next in the queue, so I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I got this issue with crime reports. And so I said, look, okay, now, you went to SunGuard, they're not getting crime reports anymore. I'm looking at my neighborhood, there's no crime. Would that it be so, but it isn't. You know, I have, thanks to Edward Gehring, who sends out friendly neighborhood bulletins, I found out we had about 6 burglaries within 10 blocks of my house, and I started getting worried, you know, I mean, I need to buy an alarm now, what's going on here? So
Winchester.
I went and I took the time to write to crimereports.com, and I asked them, what's going on? And they said, well, apparently your department has stopped sending us data and is now contracted with another firm to report it. So they didn't say who their competitor was, but I assume that you guys might know. So I'm going to forward this to you, and maybe you can look into it. But their argument, of course, is why not share it with everybody? Because that would benefit them if you did. But I just would like to know, the map you've got now on your report shows 6 burglaries within about a 10-block neighborhood, a friendly neighborhood where I live. So yeah, I would like to be able to access it. And I don't think we can do that now at the city website. I couldn't find any map with crime data posted.
Yeah, the new records management system, we're starting with the fundamentals first, and we'll work our way up to be able to populate maps like that.
Okay.
But the analysis that we do, apart from the criminal intelligence, in the ideal, we will have those maps available to the community.
Oh, okay.
I know you mentioned earlier that we don't do that, but we had maps on our website for a long time, but changes in our capacity to do work right now is what's happening. We're still working the bugs out in the new RMS.
Thank you. I have George, Ed, and James. Edward and James.
thank you for thanking me for getting the word out. I get it from the register guard, who gets it from the police department's call center in something close to real time, bearing in mind that those are calls for service, not actual crimes, and that the data reflected on the map reflects the time the call came in, not the time the crime occurred. But it's a pretty good, in that instance where you see 7, 8 burglaries in a single day where you've gone a week or two with just one a day, you can spot those kinds of trends. So if anybody's not already looking at the register guard for this, there it is. Thank you for the department sending that information to them.
Thank you, Evan. And George?
How is the new software update going? I got the privilege of a ride-along, I think the first or second night, and I had to hold the guy's hand off the gun because he's about to commit suicide. He was real frustrated as I changed software at my shop. It's a pain, a real big pain. Yeah. And is it smoothing out? Is it going better? And what percentage are you in? In other words, at my shop, in last August, we updated our software and we're using 25–30% of it. We still have vast amount. We're easing into it, let's say. So how's the transition going in your?
I think the experience you had with the officer you rode with is a pretty typical one. It's very frustrating to go from, basically a handwritten system that we've had for many years to this one. The data entry happens with the officer. It doesn't happen by a clerical person somewhere. And that's just the way these systems are right now. I wish Microsoft was producing police records management systems, but they're not. So it's a little early to say. I think as our officers become more proficient and as we enter into phase 2 where we continue to fix more of the bugs and we add the things to it that will make it easier and more user-friendly, that it'll improve, but it's always going to take a little more time to do some of the entry work than it ever has in the past. It's a little disappointing that this is the way law enforcement is going, because what you want to give the officers is tools to make them more effective in the field, not undermine them. But we do give them things that make their job a little bit harder. In-car video systems are great, they provide good evidence in a lot of cases, but they add time to what it takes to get a report done, because officers will want to review those to ensure that their report is very similar to what's on the video, so that takes more time. This report writing system is going to give us awesome crime analysis. We'll be more effective as a department because we can deploy more accurately in the areas and at the times when we should be there. We'll know more about the criminals that are committing crimes, but it's cutting into the time our officers should be doing proactive work.
Thank you. And next is James.
I'll be really brief. When we were having the discussion around the policy, I mentioned that perhaps there's an opportunity for the commissions to actually be a part of some training like the training that Captain Campcart gave. I'm not sure. I know that budget and stuff is really tight and stuff. That's an issue. And I know that the police, the Citizens Academy and stuff, I don't know if that's still something that's going on. And maybe that would be a consideration of something like this, scale down, just the actual courses, because I know they attend courses in there. And those will be open to the police commissions where they can actually go there. And it'll give them, those that never had a background in law enforcement and stuff, can kind of see a little bit more where they can kind of understand. So it'll make the communication a lot smoother, when we go back and we talk to other community members. I would also ask that the police commissioners also challenge the neighborhood watch in your areas and stuff. Make sure that they get more involved in this so far as disseminating the information. When we get information out, and we will pass those on to those neighborhood watch units and stuff, and then they can keep the community informed. That's another avenue of broadening out the communications and stuff. So.
Thank you. Is anybody else with any questions or issues they want to have? Now's the time to do it. Another last shot there, Chief. Anything else you want to add?
That's good.
Okay. Thank you very much for presenting the report. Thank you for your questions. So moving on to the next section. And now we're into the report from the Stops Data Committee. And I wanted to take just a moment to thank Carlos for his leadership in getting this together so quickly. I was actually talked to Carter about it. I'm amazed at the amount of work the committee has done in such a short time. So thank you, all of you who served on that and agreed to do that. You really have brought things together, and I know you have some things you'd like to bring up tonight, so I'll turn it over to you, Juan Carlos.
So this is my time to kind of present what the committee is been doing. First, I'd like to say thanks to EPD for the support with providing staff for the committee. It really makes a difference. In fact, we had a running agreement that we want to make sure that we have staff person there present, because it's important to, sometimes keeps us out of trouble with making sure that we're in compliance with the public records. But also, being supported in terms of what we need to accomplish. So as you know, the committee itself was actually created on the wishes of the commission to create it, to execute the motion to hold a panel and also later a public hearing regarding police bias policing. So the committee focused initially on getting a list of potential panelists, and we came up with over 30 panelists, very well versed people, community people. In fact, some of our community members didn't know about some of the members out there. And I will tell you that the energy around the community has been great. They've been not only wanting to get things moving, as you can tell, but also been extremely flexible, and that's something that I really appreciate. I thought that our first meeting would drag on, and we probably wouldn't get anything done. But actually, I want to give credit to Edward, to Mr. Weiland, and of course to Joe, that how much work you already put in. So we have here a couple of things to present to you. We have identified the final candidates that will be hopefully coming, if you approve it, they'll come to the commission to share some perspectives. So the committee identify different aspects or how to choose folks that will be on the panel, people with that bring some valuable community experience, some of them that have historical context, people from the advocacy sector, of course somebody from the legal aspect of it, and of course people that actually have implemented these policies. We're talking about departments that have already experienced implementing these type of policies that we're looking at. And we even talked about maybe bringing an officer who may have experienced with this policy. But I think that was brought up in terms of being affected or being put through the system. So with that, we have had a few meetings. The committee itself is requesting that the panel be held during the police commission meeting on March the 13th. And the committee is asking for your consideration for 90 minutes. The panel itself will be between 5 and 7 panelists. And of course, we'll include a simpler format to have each panelist to do introductory remarks, followed by all of you asking questions, and if appropriate, include and allow the public to also ask questions. And the committee talked about maybe writing questions on a card, or maybe even having them read the questions, but kind of include that public and civic participation. So we also did an extensive talk about how to do the public hearing, and we are ready to recommend specific date, and hopefully that will be April the 13th. And we are hoping to do it in the community. The panel itself that we're asking for your support in holding it during the police commission meeting, the committee is also asking for your support to have that meeting at Harris Hall to allow more participation from folks. The committee also is asking for resources to do outreach and to publicize both the panel and the public hearing. We're specifically asking for you to approve the panel to be held during the police commission on the 13th, to have 90 minutes for that purpose, and to have it at Harris Hall. The committee also is asking for resources, money for the publicity, although we didn't talk about how much and whether or not that's even possible. Our job is to bring it forward. And also for you to okay that we'll be doing public service announcements to publicize the actual community panel and the public hearing. If you give us your blessing on the PSA, we'll be developing specific talking points that will reflect your wishes on what you're hoping to learn. I just attached the table of the people that were identified as panelists. The committee went back and kind of ranked those folks according to how the committee viewed those folks in specific areas. The one person can, in fact, cover across the board and may have more to say across the board. So that was just for your reference.
So the numbers on there represent a rank?
Yes, that we did reverse math. The person with the highest number were the ones that the committee thought would probably be our highest priority, and we had choice 2 and 3. And the committee also, thank you for the question, the committee also thought that we also need to make sure that the folks that would not be in the panel, that we find ways for us to include them, whether there's written feedback or invite them to come to the public hearing. So we'll find ways to include them. There were even some conversations about doing some interviews, but may or may not be part of the police commission. I will allow that the rest of the committee members to chime in and add more stuff. Edward, you have anything?
No, the one thing that I see that we talked about but that didn't make it into this was the discussion of money not just for posters but for advertising on social media.
Okay.
Other than that, good presentation. I think that covers. I was impressed with the size and quality of the list of possible participants that we had, and I want to echo Juan Carlos's feeling that we should find a way that all of these people can feel that they are part of this deliberative process over the year that the policy is being tested out and finally fine-tuned.
Thank you, Edward. And Bill, you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered the meetings well, Juan Carlos, and I think I just hope that, our intention is putting together a very informative panel with a lot of different experiences.
Okay. And Joe, you have anything else to add?
Well, one thing is that on the public hearing, it states April 13th. That's actually a Sunday. It should be April 3rd.
Thank you.
Was the date that I think we honed in on, but again, that would be something to be brought before the larger group to approve the schedule.
Thank you, Joe, for that correction. One thing to note, Commissioners, that the committee is recommending that data collection, socioeconomic status will be predominant in the actual policy. We took a vote and we're actually making that as a recommendation to the Police Commission.
All right, have Claire, Mike, and then it looks like Edward again.
Claire?
I have to hold you back, Ed, till the second round.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that last